Hello and welcome to the Arise interview, where we take time to reflect on the big stories from the news and on the fortunes and affairs of the world in an hour of conversation with commentators, analysts and thought leaders. I'm Charles Aniagolo. Coming up in the next 60 minutes, the fallout continues from that dramatic Prince Harry and Meghan Markle interview. More than 50 million people have now watched that Oprah Winfrey chat about the allegations made against the royal family. And the royal family have now issued a response. So, the end of the matter or just the beginning? We'll speak with Britain's top royal commentator, Richard Fitzwilliams. And later, the Australian state of Victoria announces an inquiry into the impact of colonisation on Aboriginal people, the first probe of its kind in the country. Unlike other Commonwealth nations, Australia has never formally examined the full implications of past policies, and the authorities in Victoria say a proper examination is long overdue. We'll speak to a Nigerian pastor who works with Aboriginal communities in Western Australia. And later still, why local officials in one state in northwestern Nigeria are giving vigilante groups pump-action shotguns and double-barreled rifles to face off against bandits and criminal gangs armed with AK-47 assault rifles and rocket-propelled grenades, as everyone else braces for some kind of awful escalation. Coming up. Now, a day after Harry and Meghan's bombshell revelations were shown on British television, the royal family has bowed to pressure to respond, with newspapers in the UK asking questions like, who is the royal racist? Any attempt to maintain a dignified silence in the face of the Oprah Winfrey interview was always going to be difficult. And in the past 24 hours, Buckingham Palace has issued a statement which referred in particular to the claims from the Duke and Duchess of Sussex that a member of the royal family had asked about the likely colour of their son's skin. The statement reads, quote, "The whole family is saddened to learn the full extent of how challenging the last few years have been for Harry and Meghan. The issues raised, particularly that of race, are concerning. While some recollections may vary, they are taken very seriously and will be addressed by the family privately. Harry, Meghan and Archie will always be much loved family members." End of quote. Well, for more on this, who better to turn to than the UK's top royal commentator, Richard Fitzwilliams, who is also one of Britain's best-known art historians and is additionally a hugely popular international film critic. And Richard joins me now from London. Richard, thank you ever so much for joining us. It's been a while, but it's great to see you. Now,
extraordinary. This really has been a week that I can only describe this as fox.
So let me ask you this then. What are your thoughts on that interview, first of all, given by Harry and Meghan? I mean, people are comparing it to the reputational damage suffered by the royal family after Princess Diana's revelations, and there is concern for the well-being of the people who are within the royal family.
This unquestionably is something that I can only describe as seismic, because we knew that Harry and Meghan were extremely unhappy as senior working royals, because after their extremely successful trip to southern Africa, they told this to us in an ITV documentary. Now they've gone on Oprah, and tens of millions around the world have been, well, told that their lives were similar to those, in the case of Meghan certainly, as the palace was some form of prison. The allegation that, which you mentioned, that has had tremendous publicity and caused horror, was the allegation that an unnamed member of the royal family had made comments about Meghan's unborn child's skin color. I mean, this really is not only bizarre, but also something that clearly has caused enormous offence. There is also the very, very sad aspect to it. There's no doubt at all that Meghan appears to have felt isolated and somewhat besieged and had felt even suicidal. Very definitely echoes. You mentioned Princess Diana's Panorama interview of 1995, and there are echoes of that and of some of Diana's complaints against the royal family in this. Also, the issue that kept coming up dealing with security, a matter for the police to be sure, but that Harry and Meghan unquestionably felt unprotected. Added to that, a whole series of allegations and also information. We didn't know some form of ceremony took place 3 days before the wedding, which was so spectacular, and the tragedy of all this, which the Queen referred to by saying how saddened she was in the statement that you read out, because Harry and Meghan being American, biracial, a divorcee, former actress, but someone who was articulate and an activist, this was going to be the future face of the royal family, with Harry so keen on charitable work and also so close to the nation's heart as someone who, of course, had been bereaved when his mother died and had suffered and shared with us how he'd suffered from a point of view of mental stress and the mental illness aspect of it and the stress suffered by press intrusion. I mean, these were issues that kept coming up in the near 2 hours. In the reality, the interview, I understand, was 3 hours, 20 minutes. It couldn't have been more like a bombshell, quite frankly.
And I mean, you were obviously close to sort of royal circles and so on. You mentioned the response of Buckingham Palace. Read between the lines for us. What is that statement really saying? Because it sounds like it's saying that the door on this particular conversation is shutting, and that the word is that that statement appears to be private or privately. I mean, that appears to be the key word there.
Well, I would say there were several aspects to this. Firstly, the palace waited quite some time before putting out a 61-word statement. Some might say, why wasn't it longer? Well, the answer I just given actually saying that the actual interview was so much longer than we saw, and you could have, in fact, in any form of point-by-point rebuttal, it wouldn't have been dignified, and you cannot get into that situation. And also you could have had allegations that kept coming out, which would have made what you had previously said to some extent redundant, or could have raised extra questions. The Queen was emphasizing the fact that she sees this as a private family matter. Equally, she specifically, and she is head of the Commonwealth and someone who's championed diversity all her life, she has specifically been concerned about the allegations of race. Obviously, as I say, that has caused real shock. Equally, there is the aspect in the royal statement that memories can most emphatically differ, because there are several aspects of Harry and Meghan's interview: the issue of Archie's title, aspects of the security, the wedding, if that's what it was, of a form 3 days before, the allegation that it was Meghan and not Kate who cried in an incident involving a bridesmaids fitting before the wedding, and so forth. The whole series of these was the Queen blindsided by Harry and Meghan's, as I had understood, announcement of stepping back, which caused a crisis for the royal family instantly. They say that this was very, very different. I mean, you would basically understand from the statement from Buckingham Palace that it does close the door to public discussion of, for example, who on which the unnamed royal who made racist comments was. I mean, that I think is important that it be done in a dignified fashion, because the moment, especially in the era of social media, Harry and Meghan talked of media intrusion and press and stress caused by the press and so forth. What you would have if you didn't shut down this conversation, but also make sure, and this is the very, very important point, what reform will happen and how it will happen behind palace walls, because these are the complaints that were made. The fact that Meghan couldn't get help from the Human Resources Department, the fact that they felt isolated, the fact that they felt royal aides were briefing against them, and so forth. To address this is a matter behind palace walls. The important thing is that it's done because the palace realizes, I am sure, and the Queen, nearly 95 with her husband, Prince Philip, 99, seriously ill, and he's undergone a procedure for a pre-existing heart condition. He's 100 on the 10th of June. I mean, very clearly this is a difficult time for the Queen, but there's no doubt that this needed to be done, and I think that they've hit the right note. Obviously, this has had an extraordinary response, and in the response of the public, in the response internationally, I mean, these are important issues.
So, from your assessment then, Richard, a successful attempt to do the traditional act of Buckingham Palace when facing criticism or probing inquiry, which is to draw the curtain and say this much is private and you are not getting any more. But will it be possible to keep it inside the family when so much dirty laundry has been aired to so many viewers?
We've had President Biden express support for Meghan's courage in speaking out when, and he's referring specifically on the issue of mental health. And this is something, of course, Harry has spoken about in the 20 years after Diana's death. You also got a Commonwealth audience, and mainly of young people, 67% of the Commonwealth, Meghan said, are younger or young, how they respond, because in Britain there's been a division between the older who've been more supportive of the attitudes of the palace in its statement, and who felt that this wasn't an appropriate interview, and the younger people who tend to take a different view and sympathize more with Harry and Meghan. I mean, there's no mistake. This is a crisis. I don't see that it could have been at the moment dealt with in a different way, simply because you couldn't. You would have constant and endless media speculation. But what subsequently happens, and what I think the Queen, by mentioning at the end of that statement that Harry, Meghan and Archie will always be much loved members of the royal family, this is there's an element of the statement which casts doubt on the way they've, shall we say, remembered certain incidents, i.e. the palace, and they do not agree in certain areas, but without going into them. But on the other hand, looking to the future, you simply have to feel towards some form of healing. I mean, on the 1st of July, what would have been Diana's 60th birthday, Harry and William will be unveiling a statue to her, at least that is.
Okay, I apologize for interrupting you, Richard. We've got to take a short break, but it's fascinating talking with you. We'll come straight back to you, so do stay with us. You're watching the Arise interview. Plenty more still ahead as we continue our chat with Britain's top royal commentator about the repercussions of that interview by Harry and Meghan about the royal family. Stay with us. Welcome back to the Arise interview. I'm Charles Enyegolu. Now, as you may know, Buckingham Palace has now responded to that interview given by Harry and Meghan earlier this week. The royal family says the issues raised, particularly concerning race, will be taken very seriously and will be addressed by the family privately. The allegations made by Harry and Meghan that there were several conversations within the royal family about how dark their firstborn son might be have now gone around the world. Meghan also spoke about how lonely she felt within the royal family and said her mental health got so bad that she didn't want to live anymore, adding that she didn't get any support for her mental health issues from Buckingham Palace. and the UK's top royal commentator Richard Fitzwilliams, who is also a well-known art historian and international film critic, is still with me from London. Richard, thank you very much indeed for staying with us. There is, of course, a certain dynamic to these crises, and I'm wondering if there is one factor which probably works in Buckingham Palace's favour, which is that Harry and Meghan have left as working members of the royal family. They've left the UK, and they've sort of left the formal mechanism of the palace.
Yes, and indeed there was an interesting thing that Harry said, which was in fact rather curious. One of the aspects of the interview that really was dramatic was the revelation that he and Prince Charles were not currently speaking to each other, that his calls were not being returned, and also that apparently, because they used to receive funding from the Duchy of Cornwall, that was cut off. And Harry said that the reason for the deals with Netflix and Spotify, which I had always assumed were part of their new life, was because they basically, apart from the money left to him by Princess Diana, needed funds. I mean, there's no question that the point you raise is very significant, though, because in Hollywood, which is Meghan's home, they have contacts among top Democratic Party figures and also, of course, top actors, whether George Clooney, Oprah herself. I mean, there's no question that that was an interview where Oprah was openly supportive of them, and also they intend, when the pandemic permits, to launch their non-profit charitable organisation Archwell. And Meghan also had a victory against Associated Newspapers for publishing extracts of a letter she wrote to her estranged father, Thomas Markle. So far as the future's concerned, I would have thought that they are in the right place as opposed to what they considered the dark place, I quote, in the interview, which is the palace. They certainly have enormous potential. They've got global reach, their particular brand, and they're also public speakers. Harry Walker, public speaker with the Obamas and Clintons members, and no doubt after the pandemic they will be able to make money in that way, and also they will appear personally because, of course, the pandemic has held this up. But yes, as far as Buckingham Palace is concerned, though, there must be concerns when you look forward and you think of royal events. Now, as members of the royal family, who are much loved, they will be sent invitations. If they appear publicly with other members of the royal family, the emphasis, at least for the foreseeable future, will be an almost obsessive interest in all the body language that we see. And if we think back a year to pretty well to today, when the Commonwealth Day last year, it appeared, and this is very rare for royal occasions, that you saw a frisson that you could actually see between the Cambridges, William and Kate, and Harry and Meghan. They didn't look at all easy in each other's company, even though the Sussexes were seated behind. Now, this is going to be part and parcel of the way royal life is going to be covered from now on. If they do attend a royal event, and if it's a public event, they will be more than a part of it. Now, I do have to say there is an aspect of things where the Sussexes are obsessed, I use the word advisedly, with publicity and privacy, and both of them on their terms. There's absolutely no doubt that, and we saw this in the interview, it was clear the way the tabloid press coverage has affected them and has infuriated them. There's also, I mean, in the days of Princess Diana, of course, most tragically, we know what happened with the paparazzi. These days, the paparazzi are lower than vermin, as always, but they are sidelined. What has taken their place is this vastness of trolling online, of Twitter attacks, and how you control that is extremely difficult. But there's no doubt that the pressure of all this has been intense on them, and to some extent, some of this will continue because it does to people in public life, but it is a very definite burden that they have to bear. And one of the tragedies is that the relationship between Harry and Meghan and other members of the royal family became as bad as it did, certainly, so far as they could see, through the way palace staff were behaving and, as they saw it, briefing against them and so forth. So there was this feeling of isolation. They did praise the Queen, but it was again emphasized, and we saw this in the ITV documentary, that Harry and William feel that they are on different paths. And after an interview like that, which basically can have been compared to some form of bombshell, I think that it will take quite some time to heal privately.
Right, okay, well, thanks very much indeed for setting that out comprehensively and in good detail. Now, let's just move away from the royal family directly and talk about the fallout from this interview, because it is fair to say that it's divided opinion and has even cost one high-profile television presenter his job. I mean, the TV star Piers Morgan has quit over comments he made about it. He certainly didn't sound like he liked Meghan very much.
In fact, he intensely dislikes Meghan, as I understand it. This has been the case for a very long time, but it was specific comments he made about her that led to his departure from Good Morning Britain.
So, I mean, a celebrity victim of this affair, but presumably his departure will probably be of less import to the royal family and the British monarchy than the interview and, of course, the original departure of Harry and Meghan.
Oh, I think that this is something, and the Queen has stressed this in the statement, where she said that she was sad and concerned, and the realization also of how challenging it had been for them. The departure of Harry and Meghan, which followed the departure of Andrew, has meant that there are far fewer working members of the royal family. Also, it's important just to remember that the work they do for charity, over 2,000 engagements each year, some 3,000 institutions and organizations they're linked to.
Right. Well, I don't mean to interrupt you, Richard. I apologize for that, but we've got about a minute left, and I want to get your take on this. When you look at that statement from Buckingham Palace acknowledging how challenging the last few years have been for Harry and Meghan, acknowledging the issue of race, but not really dealing with it in any depth, given what you know of the royal family, do you think they can and will change? Because many people had hoped that the acceptance of Meghan would be that change.
Yes, you're right. I think that there will be a change. I think the change with the Windsors happens gradually. I do think that there will be an attempt that must succeed to reform what goes on behind palace walls. That is why it's such a difficult question to answer, but that is why it is a question that after an interview like this, like Harry and Meghan's, as I say, absolutely incendiary comments and what they felt and what they've experienced or say they've experienced, this is the sort of question that absolutely has to be asked.
Richard, you're an absolute star in your own right, and thank you very much indeed for joining us. Richard Fitzwilliams, who is, of course, the top royal commentator in Britain, who is also a well-known art historian and international film critic. You're watching the Arise interview.